What am I doing here?
Our first speaker isn't here. One of our second speakers is. I just checked the list.
Yeah. Oh, let's give it another 3 minutes. Does that sound good to you, Elizabeth?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ah. Sorry.
Both of our second speakers are here.
Well, oh, yes.
I've been told that Councilmember Power should be on in a moment.
Okay, good.
Jane Marshall has her hand up.
Oh, Elizabeth and Anthony,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah?
I'm just a little worried about Marymount. You know, they aren't really taking care of the building at all. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. When I'm through with school, I myself will write a letter to the acting head of Marymount to try to find out what's going on, just to let you guys know.
Okay.
That's
Thank
all. I
you.
can be unmuted. Thank you.
Ah. Unless there are people waiting, oh no, we don't do a waiting room, do we?
No, Councilmember Powers is on. I'm going to send the unmute button.
Yep, please. And I
Council,
will
are you getting
start.
are you getting the prompt to unmute?
He doesn't seem to
Oh,
be.
sorry.
There
Yeah.
he is.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Sorry, guys. Sorry.
No problem. All right. Welcome. Welcome to the June 2024 meeting of the Zoning and Development Committee of Community Board 8, Manhattan. And we have a full agenda this evening, so we should get started. And I think the best place to start is for Kevin to once again repeat the instructions on Zoom conduct.
Yeah, welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining us virtually, you will notice that you are currently muted, and everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting, except for the committee co-chairs, Anthony and Elizabeth, and any presenters as we move through the agenda. As we move through the agenda, the co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the react icon on your device and pressing the raise hand button, not the wave or thumbs up, as those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you are calling in on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is available for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you need to go to participants section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So we're going to begin with the first item on our agenda, which is in fact welcoming council person Keith Powers to our meeting. And the reason that we've asked you here, aside from actually loving to have you here at our meetings, is in fact to find out the city council passed the City of Yes for Economic Development. And we are interested in your perspective on that and what, in fact, is different from what it was that we voted on whenever that was last year.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. Nice to see everyone. And I hope everyone's getting through this heat storm we've had for the last few days and staying cool and everything else. So I think there's good two things that are on the agenda. One is around the forward-looking housing proposal, and also what's been voted on in the city council in the past. So I think most people know this, but I still think helpful to go through some of the impetus and logic for the proposal that came from city planning to the city council, and obviously through you guys in that process. We, essentially the economic development proposal was an attempt to try to update and modernize a lot of the rules and regulations around small businesses and economic development in the city. Some of it was stuff that the final product was, a lot of ideas that were put forward by city planning, went through your process, went through the borough president's process, came to the council, and was subject to lots and lots of, conversation and dialogue. I will, put into the chat a more formal document we have that I think outlines a lot of what the city council's modifications and changes were. And some of them were, in a case or two, actually outright removing something. Some things were making modifications that might address real current concerns. Like one of the main concerns that we heard from a lot of folks was I think you had noted this as well, the use of homes for commercial businesses and what updates they might be proposing to do that. And the council had a lot of debate and dialogue about those types of proposals and where they might make sense and where they might go awry. and how to create reasonable limitations. That's one of the modifications we made, is to create limitations on, for instance, like residential buildings. And if somebody wants to run a business out of their home in a building, some cases that may make sense. In a lot of cases, we're concerned about inviting strangers into your building and some of what businesses are we running at. So that was an area of heavily debated in the council as we discussed it, and came up with some modifications around that. Another one that doesn't affect us necessarily so much is a lot of folks were concerned about, well, the changes to corner stores in residential neighborhoods and converting some uses to be able to accommodate for like a corner store. Now that doesn't seem so crazy to us. We have corner stores all over our district, but a lot of folks really thought in some residential neighborhoods the only businesses could be ones that are like illegal cannabis stores or things like that. So those were taken out at that point as well. We added in some restrictions and changes when it comes to last mile facilities in the city, and a lot of discussion around deliveries and last mile throughout the city. And that was a big city council conversation that's particularly in the Bronx. A lot of the colleagues felt strongly about, which is to create new regulations, so we're not totally blowing up the doors of that as well. We had received a lot of feedback. Both came from CB8, Carnegie Hill Neighbors, Madison Avenue, and others about some of the special districts in CB8. We did create a modification around some of these delivery facilities where Amazons and others might be, the proliferation of them on a place like Madison Avenue. Frankly, in a lot of conversations also with folks in the business community and the bid over there, there was a lot of debate about what might really become usable in that area based on the rents there, based on the likelihood of them, somebody taking like Amazon taking a space of a certain size in that particular area, and like sort of trying to find a balance between those concerns and some of the realities of there, but also being a little bit challenged by, a large process that subject to a lot of negotiation between us and the mayor and the city planning, of course, and also, frankly, some things that were out of scope and were illegal to include or not. But we had a lot of discussion the sort of last, sort of stretch there, really about areas like the Special Madison Avenue district, which is really important to me and to us. But I am confident on that one, and we'll talk about housing. I am confident in that one that, end of the day, we're trying to modernize and update. I think the council made a number of modifications. I'm going to put them into the chat now so folks can take a look at them. But the goal, obviously, here was to find the right balance between modification and modernization, and to make sure that anything we do is not going to create harm to these areas, but also really regular. There's some proposals around how to repeal the cabaret law and the zoning. I was a strong proponent of that. I believe that is just only used in examples where they're trying to go after and discriminate against certain establishments. That has long outlived its useful purpose. But we tried to incorporate feedback from communities and community boards, colleagues, but also strike the right balance between all of them. Now we move on, as you guys know, I know you're discussing it, the housing proposal, which is going to be a great discussion in the council and I know throughout the city. You're already seeing a lot of, I think a lot of dialogue around it. And exactly, I definitely, I think many others want to see the council rise to the challenge of meeting the housing crisis at the end of low vacancy rate in the city. And I frankly think too often I hear from my colleagues, all the problems should be solved in Manhattan. And, build more there. We support it. I can send you the tweets. I support more housing, but it's in your district and in Julie Mennon's district and in other districts. And frankly, we want our community board and our community to accept its responsibility to welcome people here. I also would like to see everyone do that. And so this discussion now opens up to a lot of communities and invites them into that conversation. And we're talking about, there is obviously a part of it around height and density in Manhattan. There's a part about office conversions that I think is exciting and a big opportunity. And there's a lot of stuff that really hits the outer boroughs about accessory dwelling units, around parking requirements, other things that I think are going to be subject to a lot of conversation and a lot of mixed opinions in the council about where that's going to go. I am weighing, I've expressed my outward support for the idea. I also, frankly, wanted to see, I have 3 community boards, you guys, CB6, CB5, plus great groups like Carnegie Hill Neighbors and others that I value and I want to hear from. So, until, everybody is sort of weighed in, I think our process from there is going to be to take all those comments and, work through them to see how we can accommodate. I think although there was some challenges in the last proposal, I think those comments from groups were extremely helpful to try to figure out what is real and what's not, and what really needs to be addressed. And already we've solicited feedback throughout the district from some groups and had a really good opportunity to go to city planning to say, this is a thing we're hearing, to get an answer and figure out how it might apply, how it might not. So I, as you guys are doing, welcome a lot of that early. And I'm certainly open to when you guys have, want, if anybody here in their individual capacity or not wants to talk about that, and their specific communities, I want to do that. And I, as you guys know, our friend Dan Garanik, my predecessor, is the chair. He understands your concerns and this community like the back of his hand. So I think he welcomes that too. And we want to, in all this, find the right landing spot and make sure we're kind of upholding the goals of it. But we don't want to create inadvertent problems where they might exist. So, I would welcome with any community group, any other community board, others, continue kind of, I see some from city planning here as well today. I think we all would welcome to hear that feedback. But I really do think, all of us need to really think deeply about what is a very low vacancy rate, crisis that we are facing in this city, and how all of us can pull our weight as we do that. Because this doesn't go away unless we help all together solve for this problem. So I'm happy to take questions or go from there. But I always appreciate you guys, your thoughtfulness and your care and consideration when we talk about these really important issues.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you very much. While people are queuing up or raising their hands for questions, it isn't exactly queuing up. So the economic development piece of City of Yes, you generally feel that was more or less a successful process?
I think that yes.
That the result was something that let's say.
Look, I voted for it. So yes, I think those stated goals were important. I think we had, aspired in some areas to try to make additional changes that were difficult to get in, whether it's a legal reason, where scoping and issues are intended to. And we really tried to honestly talk to all different stakeholders. In some cases, in different parts, there were different opinions from different stakeholders about exactly to attend to those issues. We tried to meet that. I am confident we'll meet a lot of what it needed to do, which is update our laws and modernize. I think some of the stated concerns, not from you guys, but in the world about some elements of it, I think we either addressed or in our dialogue and discussion was convinced that it was not going to open up a major set of issues. I will be the first, if there's a major issue here, to talk with city planning and the council about how we fix those. But I think we landed in a good spot in some of those issues to make sure that concerns that were not just heard by CB8, but other community boards, and they were not, you would find, in dense Manhattan to, other areas, some similarities what people were talking about to address those. But we have, a lot of the stuff is always going to be theoretical, and we have to navigate like worst case scenario, best case scenario, and figure out what that middle ground looks like. And also not to be unrealistic that if there's an issue that comes up, we have to find ways to fix it. So that's our goal, even as we move forward.
And then one more question, which is probably a little unfair.
All right.
Which of the which piece of the City of Yes for Housing opportunity is most troublesome for you? Is there a piece of it, you sort of look through it, you read through it, and you say, okay, oh.
Well, look, I think there's parts of it that are going to be subject to lots of debate that are not going to, probably intervene with our district all that much.
Mhm.
And I have some strong feelings about them, but I also want to be considerate to like the various colleagues here who are going to have to also hear from their communities and try to figure out the right spot of it. I don't know if there's a most troublesome one. I think the thing that I know and I've learned is that as we pursue it, I think is a really important goal is to, add housing and do it, evenly throughout, or do it in pieces throughout the city. That I represent from 14th to 93rd Street I represent a huge district, and I want to make sure that, as we pursue those, we also like attend to some very specific concerns that come up, and that's the balance here always. But I do also really want to offer my support for the idea and the real life implementation of addressing what is becoming a crisis in our housing market, a heated market where we need to add. We do a lot of things, but we have to do a lot of things. We have to protect existing tenants. We have to regulate against large, increases and tenants are facing, constantly. But we also do need to be additive, and I think Manhattan is always a big part of that solution. And we're going to do things. We're doing in other parts of my district major rezonings to accommodate office conversion. That's one tool. We are, always fighting for some preservation of areas where we think in units where we think it really needs it. But we also can't ignore the idea that like adding some supply, adding affordability is going to be part of that. And so, I don't know if it's an unfair question, but I think the devil's always in the details, and I'm always making sure that as you guys weigh in, we're like looking after those spots where we might have missed something in the zoning, or we have to think about how something applies to a specific area. And that's honestly where I think a lot of you guys, plus our friends at City Planning and others, can offer a lot.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've got Marco, and if anyone else has questions, they should raise their hands. Marco.
Anthony, if we can go to Valerie first, because
Oh, Valerie. Okay, sorry.
Sorry, Marco. For some reason, my raise hand feature isn't working. Hi, Councilmember Powers. Thank you for coming tonight. My question is really honestly not about City of Yes for Housing. The stated goal of City of Yes for Housing is a laudable one, a little bit of housing everywhere throughout the city. But, as everyone keeps talking about, this is a huge crisis. And we're talking about 100,000 units, maybe, since this is a voluntary program over 15 years, with only 20,000 of those projected to be actually affordable housing. And that's I don't even know if that really would take up the amount of affordable housing that we've lost in our district. So my question to you is, every time I go out there, I hear about the fact that there are over 100,000 empty apartments in New York City right now, 100,000. So while we work through City of Housing and we look forward to voluntary, creation of more housing, what can the electeds do now to open up these 100,000 empty apartments?
So I'm always great question, by the way, really good question. I think there's some actions that have been discussed in Albany around easing some of the regulatory issues. I think even this year, as part of the housing package, there was some relief given on the empty apartments. We're talking about, in that case, rent stabilized apartments that need additional rehabilitation. And there was some, I think, extra relief provided relative to the 2019 things. I know that some folks probably would say it's too much. I think there were some who said it was too little. There was a lot of debate in Albany about that. I will let the state folks talk about that. That was a part of the conversation that I was hearing a lot, was from folks who had, and there are, of course, some real instances people with apartments that were uninhabitable because they needed repairs. And you will run into instances where doing those repairs is cost prohibitive when the rules perhaps needed to be, provide a valve here to let people actually do the repairs. So they had amended, I believe, as part of this year's housing deal in Albany, the formula at which someone can get compensation for doing those repairs, because 2019, they had limited that. So I'll give you a better example. I'll say it more clearly. In 2019, after I think a lot of concerns, reasonable concerns around the system for doing individual apartment improvements and rent regulated apartments being abused, not a lot of documentation, stark rent increases, they took a step to limit the amount of increases. And folks had raised the concern that compensation was pretty limited, didn't allow for a lot of repairs, and certainly apartments that were real disrepair weren't going to be able to get the investments they needed. So they had raised that cap as part of this year and changed the formula. And that was a lot of debate. That was a big part of the debate in Albany this year. And I forget all the details. So that is definitely, I think, one big part of the conversation when we talk about unlocking, is to make sure those apartments are. I still think even if you unlock those, you still need more. And I agree with you, Valerie, that affordability really matters in those. And that's something the council is going to, discuss as well, I presume, which is around affordability. And also believe in Albany, as part of the office conversion plan, there were more incentives that I think were pretty well received to help actually spur affordability in those conversions, because we know how expensive that process is. And also, like the Pfizer building, which I'm sitting right in front of, is converting over 1,000, I think 1,400, 1,300 apartments. They, as we know, are not necessarily taking any affordable incentive to do affordability in there. That could change, but we do think others will, because they will really need the ability to convert.
But I think one of the questions that came up is, why make it an option? Like, you're allowing them to convert from commercial to residential. So why is there only one proposal in the 15 that we're looking at that requires some exchange between, okay, you get the 20% bonus if you give affordability, but there's nothing like that tied to, the conversions to residential. I mean,
I will let city planning answer that officially. I believe the answer is, I think there has always been a reasonable expectation that the zoning changes are going to be the zoning changes to create some freedom, changing the date by which you could be eligible. We're going to do some rezonings to open up opportunities in the commercial areas around Penn Station and Garment District, which I think sorely need investment in people there, because it's not a great neighborhood at certain hours. So I think more 24/7 would be great. But I think there's always been an expectation that Albany would be providing an incentive that would be almost like other tax incentives, where to do it, you're really going to have to take that incentive and do it. Now, I'm talking about Pfizer, which, to be honest, I think is a very unique example, but I think most to fund that are going to be required to, or the expectation is they're going to be taking that benefit, and that's going to help spur affordability. But some of that happened in Albany, and some of that, I know city planning's here to talk about. I'll let them put that whole puzzle together. But I want to say, it's a good question. It's a question we're going to be asking.
Okay, well, I would just hope, I don't want to take any more time except to say that we hope you come back regularly while this process is unfolding to exchange with us where it stands, and we're thinking, no matter what we vote on tomorrow, that we will continue to update our position as we hear what other community boards are doing across the city, as well as the input from the electeds and other groups as we go forward. So thanks for coming tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, and look, the one thing I want to say is, you guys are going to register you're going to do your resolution, do your process. That doesn't end the conversation at all. It ends when it gets to the city council finally. And even in the economic opportunity one, there were things that came in last minute, and we tried hard with some of the partners who I know we all care about to try to get some of that stuff to attend to, and sometimes it was a little bit late. But, you guys can do your part of this, and still always a lot of opportunity for conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Keith. The Marco is next.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Mr. Power, for listening my questions. And I think I'm very happy to hear always that you support any kind of housing. You just approve, everybody approves. And I think it's great. Even the board president of Queens came the other day in the news. He said, oh, we are doing excellent. We are building 12,000 units. I mean, everything looks great. But let's go put in context. I asked city planning to tell me what is the deficit of the housing in the city of New York. And the answer was a little bit, I don't want to say anything, but I'm gonna say what they said at the end. Several thousand units. That's what it was their answer. And in reality, I did one of the in one of the meetings with in the state. It was a hearing in housing. HPD reported 1.1 million of applicants for affordable housing was filed in 2019. And coincidentally, in this month, in 7 days, Mr. Power, they open again the Section 8, and they filed more than 600,000 families for Section 8. That means the crisis, if it's 7 days, approximately is for every second one application, approximately. So that means the crisis is very serious. So if we have a tempo right here, 12,000 right here, 500 right here, it means doesn't add up. And we have to see the problems quantitative. Once we have, then we can assess the approach. Because if we don't have the magnitude of the problem, we cannot say, oh, we're doing something good. But in this case, I don't see it that much. Do you have any numbers that what is the deficit? I don't want to put in the hot seat.
The deficit is, I'll let City Planning talk a little bit of that in there, but I'll say that. The most recent census here, the most recent study had us at about a 1.4% vacancy rate. Pre-pandemic, we're probably at 3.5%, I'd say, or about half. And what it probably, and that was bad. And probably what is probably healthy is probably somewhere over 5-6% for, I would assume is probably healthy. So we are way off. And, we're a high demand, where you guys live, where I live, Manhattan, high demand neighborhood, good schools, good jobs, all the other stuff. People want to be here. And I don't know that I have a neighbor-specific vacancy rate, but it's an area where people want to live, and they're looking for, obviously, affordable opportunities to do that. And we have a lot of things we have to do all at the same time, always to do that. But, the vacancy rate, I think, is the number I would start with. And how do you get yourself, you can ask yourself, what are the causes of that, and how do we get ourselves out of that? And but that number pre-pandemic to or a couple of years ago to today is about half of what it was, meaning we have a lot more we have a lot less units are available for anybody looking. And it gets worse when you really think about that. And the real life experience of somebody walking and trying to find an apartment means every unit's on hot demand. They're going to snatch up quickly. It is a hard, unaffordable process for a lot of these folks. So it puts an additional strain that we're not even talking about when we talk about that number on the actual process for doing it. But those are starting point numbers. I will definitely, of course, take up Valerie's offer to be back as needed throughout this process, and also happy to share numbers that we'll get from city planning and mayor's office around exactly what the catch-up number is for all of us. And look, I will stress again, we have to do a big piece of that because that's the benefit of living in a great neighborhood, I suppose. But we're also really calling on all communities to be part of that process. And I want all communities to see their role here is to ask and welcome more people in to what their neighborhood. Great neighborhoods deserve more people to live in them. I think in a lot of regards, we have to find that balance.
Do you have a chance?
So,
I'm sorry.
but I will ask if they don't get it today. We'll follow up with city planning in the mayor's office with some. I see some on here with some better numbers to highlight exactly what I would say is kind of like the catch up number or the way out. And I'm sure that's a range, but I think that's a great point, which is like we have to define our problem. But I think the vacancy rate is a great way to look at the problem as a starting point.
The vacancy rate, according with my understanding, a healthy real estate market is when you have at least the vacancy rate of 5%. That is basically what I understand. On the other hand, my concern is the vacancy rate doesn't say much, because I'm going to give you the history of somebody else in the community. It was one of the reps from the board of president, not this one, the former, and I was talking to her. I said, listen, this is, I'm very involved in the affordable housing. And she told me, listen, affordable housing is my own problem. I'm fighting because my first check that I received, I saved completely for the rent. And part of the second check, I had to save to pay the rent. I think that tells you everything. And I think we need to establish the quantity, the problem, what it is, and then we can move forward. And then we can say, okay, we approve 100,000, 200, 300. Well, we are moving in the right track. I think, thank you so much. I don't want to take your time.
Yeah, no, thank you
for your time.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Marco. Rita Popper is next.
Hi, Keith. You and I, we go back a long way.
We do.
Two questions. One has I came up with the Mitchell-Lama, and so did you.
Mm-hmm.
The city didn't have anything to do with it. It was the city and it was the state and the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hear that the city is getting any aid from or going to the federal government to get some aid to address this affordable housing problem. Has the city council thought about federal and state involvement?
We have. I mean, there's a lot of state involvement in all these issues, and it's always us being a creature of the state, and some of our laws pertaining to that. And I remember vividly being with you when we were trying to make sure you guys were safe and secure as well. But I think that we, I was down in the White House and with the federal government and colleagues down there. I think it was last year. To talk about the money we need for the asylum seeker crisis, which is money specifically for that, but really when we talk about our budget, which we're doing right now, it all sort of blends together. And we are recipients, and we do get aid from the federal government. But as you know, on the asylum seeker crisis, other things, it can be hard and it's a long process. It depends on who's in control and other things. Where we have great federal elected officials here representing us, obviously Representative Nadler, and also statewide. But the challenge at times we get, I think what the pros we're talking about, at least for the House, for the city of Yes, is that is really the zoning. And really about how we can unlock opportunities within that, which is really within our control. And I always get a little bit hesitant over relying on the federal government, the state, because we don't know when that's going to run out. That's out of my control, certainly. Zoning's not. Zoning's right directly in our control. And the state has done a big chunk of this in their housing plan this year. They did a little bit of stuff around zoning, some stuff about incentives. And we're going to hopefully some of that will actually pencil out and will work out. But we have federal support in a lot of areas, but the politics in Washington being what they are, it's hard to rely on them, and it's also hard to receive at all all the time. So some of the stuff that we're doing is to try to be creative within our own framework and what we have control over, which is to open and expand opportunities in that. But when we talk about housing vouchers and other things, we always need federal aid and federal support. And the more we get, the more we can do. And, our district doesn't have lots of it, but we're ignoring the conversation around, public housing, which is totally relying on public dollars. And there's been major federal disinvestment in that. for a very long time. So we're always looking for more and talking to the federal folks and definitely the state folks. And the state folks, a lot of the things they're doing, we talk about vacancies and rent regulation and other programs like Mitchell-Lama, it comes from them. But I also want to make sure that within my power, we're doing what we can do, because that's obviously the most direct path to doing things that impact New York City.
Thank you. But one more question.
Yeah.
New York City makes a tremendous amount of its money on tourism. Is that correct?
Big chunk for sure.
Okay. In this city of yes, what are there protections for the Chinatowns, for the Soho, for the NoHo, for Little Korea, things that people come to this city to see? Will they be able to see it? Will it, because there's old, I know there's old housing there because I know the area is fairly well.
Yep.
Are you protecting it?
Well, look, a lot of this is applying to residential neighborhoods and residential housing, and there's going to be and I should say there's neighborhoods like we're talking about Midtown South where they are commercial areas and we want them to be residential, so we're going to unlock opportunities for that. I don't know that there's necessarily a direct layer of protection on those, but I think one of the conversations we're having is like how this should apply and where there might be concerns about how it might impact a specific community. Of course, I expect my colleagues who represent some of those areas are going to speak up. And that's when I talk about going from the big idea also down to the actual zoning and the kind of the nuance and the nitty gritty. But I expect my colleagues to represent some of those. I represent K-Town, but those who represent the areas you talked about are going to talk about that. There has been some talks, we have done a rezoning around Soho and NoHo in the past to open up opportunities for more housing. But I also want to remind people too, like just doing the rezoning doesn't mean everything is going to deliver. We're looking for lots of delivery on the housing, but we're also looking for opportunity and to make better sense of this. So where there might be really good places to do it, the rules aren't restricting them from doing it. From there, we have to also have discussions. I mean, there's, certain areas, there's a lot of things layers to this too. What's landmarking and historic districts and other things that come into play. So I speak pretty openly about my support for a lot more housing in the city. I also recognize deeply the various layers and the variances, nuances to that. I know Dan Goronick does that too. I know a lot of my colleagues do too. And you have so many colleagues who are going to say, hey, wait a second, what about this area? How does this relate to that? And that's a big, real challenge. And it's been a challenge for a long time about how to have all those conversations at the same time. And it's a big question. Big question.
As always, thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rita. Sherry Weiner.
Hi, Councilman member. One of our topics that we had to discuss is campus infill. In fact, this had the largest vote against it of any other category. Though the example given is a church with an oversized parking lot, we went through when they were trying to put additional buildings in Holmes, Niger project. When these projects were set up, the buildings were placed so people would have open space. So I wanted to point out to you, as I said, this had the largest negative vote, that we're very concerned about the Niger projects, and they shouldn't be allowed to be taken over by developers so the people living there lose any open space that they have.
I hear you. What would be really helpful? So first of all, thank you for flagging that one for me. It's actually come up in other parts of my district as well. What would be really helpful is just, I'm going to see, all your resolution stuff, but if you want to send me an individual note on that and maybe be specific about some of the concerns and areas where this might apply, we'll talk to city planning about it. We've had actually a conversation with them already on some other areas of my district and where the campus proposal, how that might work, and also what available, what like in some specific places where it might actually take place. So I'll look out for your feedback on that. But if you want to send me guys,
we'll put it, we're doing a resolution, so Valerie will make sure that
we'll get it all. We'll get it all. But I will
put that in there.
I will look out for that. Thank you for flagging that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. And we have Michael Plottel, who is, I hope I said that right, who is a member of the public, and we don't.
Oh, Michael.
Yes.
Yes. Hello. Thank you. My name is Michael Plottel. I'm an architect and I'm a lifelong resident of Community Board 8. Moved to the East Side in 1974, and I've been here ever since. I've been following the City of Yes for Housing quite a bit. It's an extremely complex proposal, very far-reaching, and there's a lot of good things. There's some things that concern me, and one thing that concerns me a great deal is in my neighborhood on the Upper East Side, east of 3rd Avenue. I've seen a lot of small buildings with affordable units being torn down for very, very large buildings with many, many fewer units. And then I see giant mechanical floors. And I see that I'm in a zone that has height limitations. However, along the avenues, there are no height limitations. And 500-foot buildings are becoming the norm, which blocks out a lot of light and air for the rest of us who still live here. The big thing, to my mind, that's lacking in the City of Yes for Housing is it does not address social infrastructure. It just seems to say if we build a whole lot of housing units, all our problems are solved. But where are the parks? Where's the retail? Where are the supermarkets? Where's all the stuff that you need once you've woken up in the morning until you go to sleep at night? And so this kind of blunt instrument of just giving a lot of bonuses to people who can afford to build high-rise buildings, there's not a lot of them, maybe works against the actual creation of affordable housing. And the complexity makes me very, very suspicious, nervous, anxious.
I understand.
Worried.
Look, I don't want you to be anxious or nervous. But part of being here is obviously to get those questions answered. And look, that is happening even before we get to this. And I understand that's your concern, but some of this is, folks having the tools to do consolidation and buy air rights and do other tools that let them to merge and go up. And I will let some of the city planning folks talk about exactly how these proposals might interact with exactly where you live. I will say this, supermarkets and retail and coffee shops and things like that are also creations of foot traffic and having people that actually want to utilize those. So those actually work hand in hand. When you talk about not just social infrastructure, hard infrastructure and things like school seats and things like that, I've been, as a staffer years ago when we were in the chase to build more high school and school space here. And that's sometimes a good problem to have, but often it's a real problem to have. Meaning you want high demand, you want supermarkets, you want people to shop at them, you want new coffee shops and restaurants, but also you want to be careful that you don't do too much burdening without thinking ahead. So that's a big goal we have to do, is to make sure that we're following those investments and opportunities correctly. But also what we're seeing in neighborhoods, I think in like Midtown South, is the lack of people living there means they don't have a nightlife that, they don't have a retail life that's sustainable. They don't have supermarkets. They actually have the exact opposite problem, which is like, you don't want to be there. And it can be desolate in certain areas, and it's, empty at night. And if you walk around, you don't feel great and safe because, retail creates safety, lights at night, people on the streetscape, it does lend itself towards safety. So I do think part of this is additive to that conversation. I think you're right to say, well, how do we always make sure in a world of planning that we're doing all those things at the same time? And I think also as we get forward in this conversation, that will be part of the conversation too. And I'm hearing areas of the city saying we need more of this and that in order to do the things that we're talking about, because they're really behind on some of those investments. But it's a absolutely fantastic question, something we're tackling, and also again, where and how this all interacts with each other is a complicated equation, and we have to still make sure as we start here, we get it down to a place that, not down in terms of reducing it, but meaning like we actually translate it into real life. And I think investment can be good for that. A lot of stuff you're talking about. And I want vacant stores filled, and I want supermarkets opening up, and we want, to see people on the streets. But I also recognize what you're talking about, which is like the anxiety that comes alongside of that, and the losing housing, as losing older buildings that people lived in as they scale up. I'll let Cindy Plain talk a little more about that. I think they're here to talk about this stuff, so I'll let them answer some of those questions as well. And
Okay.
I have to leave momentarily, but
okay. One more question then, and
Sure,
it's from Juno.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, what is preventing the city council or other parts of the government from passing laws that ban the demolition of housing without completely replacing the affordable units?
completely, well, some of that is about rent regulation housing, I think. So we may have to talk to our state partners about that. What is preventing the city council from passing a law that says you can't demolish without full replacement of the laws? I think some of that's a creature of the state level when we talk about some of the rent stabilization, and there's some rules of demolition. And I know obviously a lot of anxiety around that. So I think it's a little bit of a state law situation, if I'm being frank, because I think we're lots of them talking about rent stabilization and the state laws on that. But it's something I can try to get you an answer from the state partners about what's being done on that front.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you very much for joining us and spending so much time with us.
Thank you, guys. And like I said, I'm happy to, and Valerie's question was fair, and I'll answer it. If you guys ask me to come back on this, I'm happy to be back. So just let me know.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thanks so much.
And I'm going to turn our meeting over to Elizabeth. And we will then, I guess, move on to questions and comments to and from city planning. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Anthony. I would like to welcome the nice people from city planning who have volunteered to come and provide information to us. They've seen what we've or previous hearings or are aware of what we were talking about, the things that we raised, and they will answer questions that they feel are hanging around, and then we'll answer questions that we have. And before just get to their discussion, we've filled in their questionnaires that had 15 questions on it. The ones that we did at the full board, 11 of the 15 apply to our area. And of the 11, only one was supported. One was a wash, and 9 were opposed. And I think that we have been not concerned about the objective. I don't think there's a vote in the whole city that would say, let's not build any affordable housing. I think that the important thing we're looking at is how to do it successfully without untoward consequences. And I agree with what was raised before about not tearing down housing. I think to propose a lot of things, and this is just a general thing, not here, to make enormous steps to build affordable housing or housing at all, and then on the other hand, you want to build it on the one hand and you tear it all down on the other hand. It seems to be counterproductive. Anyway, I will welcome our guests, and I'm going to apologize before I start for mispronouncing their names. We have John Mangin, and we have Aska Mohi, something like that. Welcome to you both, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, thanks for having us. Thanks Elizabeth and Anthony for graciously accepting our offer to come here. We really just wanted to be a resource. Again, my name is Aska Mayadin, joined by John Mangin. We were there to present to the board at the full board a few weeks ago. And, you know, completely understand that we had limited time and weren't able to get to every question. And we've been following sort of the discussion happening within the community board, and it's really exciting to see, you know, everyone talking about City of Yes for housing opportunity. And completely agree, Elizabeth. You know, we're really here to present and clarify any questions. We want you to have all the information you need to be able to vote on this. You know, there's differing opinions on all these things, and that's part of the public process, and that's totally fine. Our goal here today, and every time we've, you know, spoken with the board, is really just to give you all the information you need. So it's about, you know, making that informed decision. And any comment and any concerns with any of the things that we present is totally welcome as part of your resolution that you know, find and submit to the commission. So today, before we get started with all the other questions, we wanted to also just provide some additional context information to questions that were already asked tonight to the council member. So first question is related to conversions. Valerie asked why conversions are not requiring that there be affordability requirements for every commercial to residential conversion. And John, you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Aska. I'll do a little cleanup here for all the questions that the council member said city planning should comment on. And they're great questions. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Valerie. Appreciate it. Just putting them in logical order in my head, maybe rather than chronological order. Marco, you asked about the deficit. You know, this is more art than science, but I saw another estimate of the deficit again the other day, this one by RPA. And like the previous estimates I saw from AKRF and like the city's moonshot goal, they all kind of like revolve around 500,000 units of shortage. And so, you know, like I said, more art than science, but because the estimates seem like they're converging around 500,000 units, then I would say that answer is, you know, more art than science, but looking pretty good. Valerie, you know, these proposals are estimated to create upwards of 100,000 units incrementally. That's on top of the housing production that we expect to see already, which is about 20,000 a year recently. So background production plus the increment from CHO, we're talking about 400,000 units over 15 years. CHO, the housing opportunity proposals, that represents a third increase in the amount of housing production, which, you know, is pretty significant. If we can increase housing production by a third, then I will, you know, and it's spread equitably across the city, I will consider that a pretty resounding success. You know, in terms of the vacancy, number of vacant apartments in New York City, looking at the most recent HBS, vacant and available is 30,000. It's not 100,000. There are vacant and not unavailable. As you know, we live in a global capital here. There are lots of people, for instance, who have second homes. You know, they tend to pay more taxes than they use in services. So, you know, I know some folks in city government who say, okay, sure, why not? But when we're talking about the number of vacant rental units out there right now, along with the vacant not available, those are both at, you know, the lowest they've been since the 1960s. So like the council member said, the alarms are flashing red on that. I agree with you completely that we need to put people in every single vacant unit that we can. But as you can see, if the vacant rental units, as opposed to things like second homes or apartments that, are just not in habitable condition, even if we fill all those units, it's just part of the solution. It's not in itself a solution to the deficit that Marco referenced. I have seen Marco's numbers too. I've heard quoted a lot like that Community District 8 has lost 100,000 affordable units. My division of city planning is the one that keeps all the housing data, both as it comes out year by year, but also going back in time. I mean, Community District 8 only has about 130,000 units total. So, we do not see the off-quoted stat that Community District 8 has lost 100,000 affordable units as, I don't know where that came from, but it is not a plausible statistic. In fact, when we say affordable housing at city planning, we mean something fairly specific. Income restricted units. Those are units that have a AMI attached, area median income. Maybe it's 80%, maybe it's 60%. The state tax benefit previous version was creating 130% units, which, is a little bit high for my taste and many others. But my division was not able to find the loss of any income restricted housing units in Community District 8 at all. So, take that for what it's worth. When we talk about, back to the initial question that Ozka quoted from Valerie, why is there no affordability in the conversions proposal? Well, the city council sponsored a office conversion task force a couple years back, and that involved various city agencies, various housing advocates, including Sia Weaver, who was instrumental in the rent stabilization reforms in 2019. So it included people from the tenant advocacy world as well as various architects and other practitioners. And why we don't include an affordability mandate in conversions is this. The feasibility of conversions is already a pretty dicey proposition of, the universe of office buildings out there that are vacant or underutilized. Unfortunately, only a single-digit percentage of those are candidates for conversion, given floor plates, things like operable windows, things like that. It's really, really tough. I know that, you read all these articles in the press where the assumption is the building already exists. How expensive can it be? Well, it's really expensive. When you look at feasibility without an affordability mandate, you're talking about 4%, maybe 5%, 6%. Again, a little bit more art than science, but pretty low. The Office Conversion Task Force found that when you layer an affordability requirement on top of that, that feasibility just goes to zero. And so in all of these proposals, in everything, that we're talking about up and down the line, we have to make sure that if we change the regulations, we are actually creating a realistic pathway to creating more housing. What we've seen in other jurisdictions is a real tragedy where all this political effort and policy thought is expended in trying to make pretty dramatic changes to housing, regulation in places like California. But then you see other costly requirements layered on in ways that render those kind of like a dead letter. And so part of my job as head of housing at city planning is to ensure that we're proposing real changes to create housing and not fake changes to create housing. It's the easiest thing in the world to create fake changes, pass them, have a bill signing and everybody high fives, and then, not produce any housing. That's the easy thing. The much harder thing is to actually create an open pathway for housing that creates more housing and more affordable housing as well. That 20,000 units of income restricted housing, Valerie, that you quoted, those are just the units created directly through the zoning. We work in conjunction with HPD and with various other levels of government to create 100% affordable projects within that number. So that's all additive. So HPD has been producing, over 10,000. I think they financed 15,000 affordable units last year. So that's all in addition to the 20,000 that we quoted in the environmental review. So we're talking about significant amounts of new affordable housing. If 20,000 units doesn't, impress you, well, it's only part of the overall numbers. I want to wrap it up to get more questions. I have a couple slides on on our proposals to enable contextual development on things like NYCHA campuses, on zoning lots with existing buildings, on things like irregular and obstructed sites, where today zoning forces you to do non-contextual height factor, the tall, skinny buildings that everybody hates. I feel like this whole campus infill thing has gotten a really bad rap. People don't understand what we're doing. And I will show you some slides a little later in the presentation, but I've already been talking too long. So maybe we should hear from somebody else.
All right. Anthony, I see your hand is raised. I don't know if I should be
Yes.
moderating this or.
Oh, okay. I can. Elizabeth, do you want me to handle the question part?
Go ahead. Yes. your
Okay.
paw is up.
But I have a couple of questions. And
Great.
one is, this is about the deficit. And let's say it is in fact 500,000 units, whatever it is. In a way, it doesn't really matter how many it is. It's a big enough number. Is the expectation that demand will continue to grow at its more or less current rate, and at the end of this 15 years, we will still have 500,000, we will still be 500,000 apartments short?
That's a great question. All the attempts to quantify the shortage that I've seen, whether it's AKRFs, whether it's RPAs, or whether it's behind the scenes on the city's moonshot, attempts to engage in sort of dynamic scoring. So do not assume that, well, assume that the creation of more housing does have feedback loops as well. You don't assume a static amount of demand. As prices, moderate in response to higher vacancy rates, that also, may lead, it leads to decrowding of existing housing in the city. It may lead people who wouldn't otherwise move to the city if housing is super expensive to move. And so they do attempt to consider those types of factors as well, because that, there's so much beyond our ability to understand, beyond the zoning, beyond, our local control. That's why I say it's more art than science, but they do attempt to account for those types of dynamic factors.
Yeah, because if you think about it, the only way to make the deficit go away is for fewer people to want to live in New York City. That's unlikely. It was likely for a time, but is unlikely now. But anyway, and then one other question is that I know we've talked about affordable housing, sort of that very specific AMI linked housing. Is there anything in the proposal aside from a sort of a rising tide, a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing, that would in fact create more of what we've been calling workforce housing, which is in fact for people who are not in the income, who don't qualify for income restricted housing, but want to live in our city?
That's another great question. And just to pick up the response to the last one too, I understand kind of the impulse to say we'll never be able to, provide enough housing for all the people who want to live here. Like, why even try? Of course, if we stop trying to create more housing for the people who want to live here, you really, really end up immiserating people lower down the income spectrum. And that is something that is, a policymaker and as part of an agency and a city government of people who really do care, it's obviously not an option. So we really have to try to create a range of housing opportunities for the people who live here, who are, housed in substandard ways, and also, for the people from other countries or the people from elsewhere in the United States who want to live here. As far as the zoning proposals in front of you today, the income restricted proposals are limited to an average of 60% AMI, and that involves permits a range of income restricted units from, I would say, roughly 30% is probably the low end of what we would see with income averaging, up to 100%, which is the cap. Sounds like you're maybe talking about housing for a little bit over 100% AMI. I'm not sure. For those, I would look to the aspects of the proposal that seek to create more types of housing, not just in medium and high density districts, but lower density districts as well. Some of the missing middle proposals in low density districts, like in low density commercial districts, let's re-legalize 2, 3, 4 stories of residential above a commercial ground floor. Large sites within a half mile of transit on a wide street. Let's re-legalize, 3, 4, 5 stories residential there. We were creating that as recently as 20 years ago, during the Bloomberg era. And you saw new housing being created that sold new. And of course, this is $2006, $2008 for like $200,000, or so a unit. People thought the housing was ugly, whatever, but it provided a starter home for immigrants, for families who are maybe moving from rental to, starting to build wealth. And we basically made that illegal. In terms of medium and high density districts, I'd look towards some of the smaller and shared housing proposals to try to create the types of apartments that, don't need to be $9,000 a month, that are within range to a broader range of families that do provide those types of opportunities. Those aren't officially income restricted, or at least not entirely, but creating those additional housing types is very much aimed at things that may not be income restricted, but will be available to those middle income earners who have a really hard time in the housing market today.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're going to first, hang on one second, Marco. We're going to ask.
Marco,
go.
Sorry, go ahead.
If there are any members of the public who are here who would like to ask a question of our guests from city planning, and if not, we'll go to the committee. I don't see any hands raised yet, so Marco.
Thank you, Anthony. Good to see you, Mr. Manchin. Always I'm very impressed. And the only problem is you're in the hot seat and I don't want to be there. But the issue is we are not trying to destroy, we are not trying to affect directly the issue. What I'm trying to do is basically to find something that is reasonable that the communities need. And so we can move forward. This is not a destructive comment. That is the first comment that I would like to say to you. So moving in the direction that you just said, let's go assume that this 500 dwelling units is the deficit. We are talking about just only 22%. Now, let me go in another direction that probably I raise many questions right now with many fellow community members. But before I go in that direction, I had to mention, yes, I am a licensed architect. Yes, I'm an urban planner. Yes, I'm by the properties. Yes, I build myself. I build my properties. So that allows me to have a good idea of these developments. The situation what I perceive is next. Let's go. I think you are referring to the $25 billion that the state create for creation of affordable housing. And this budget, it looks like there is a lot of money that is not. So let's go assume the affordable housing, $1,000 per square feet, included the land. That number may challenge many people, but I'm very happy to discuss deeper because we're talking affordable housing. We are not talking about luxury housing. Luxury housing could be 3 or 4 times the price. But the issue is if I have 1,000 square feet apartment, the cost to build one affordable housing in that dimension is $1 million. If I use $1 million divided by $25 billion, the only thing we may have is 25,000 affordable units in the state. And if somebody challenge the size of the apartment, we can go to half. So the only thing that we can make it is 50,000 without money. 50,000 affordable units. And indeed, Mayor de Blasio, at the end of his administration, he said that he built 140,000 units, and you are proposing 110 units. Mr. de Blasio is in 10 years, you are in 15 years. I think your approach doesn't add much. And I understand your intentions in the direction that go. But let me move in the direction that you sent.
Can I just make one point of clarification?
Oh,
Marco?
yes, please.
So the de Blasio, the 140,000, that included preservation units that already exist. In fact, that was the majority of those units. So we're talking new units compared to a combination of units. But so FYI.
It's good, the clarification to have it. And I think it clarified for everybody, even for myself. But still, they did in 10 years. That's what they said. It means I'm not defending Mr. de Blasio. I was always against him. But what I'm trying to put this in context, your proposal, which is 110 and 15 years. So that is my first concern with the situation. The second part is, in the Upper East Side, I would like to discuss later with your comments that you sent to the community board about the infill when you said the 25%. Let me go short and quick in that part. Do you know that if you are asking to put 20%, first of all, you know very well, this is under development site. So therefore, it can be, first of all, reorganized. 1, 2, there are like 3,000 or 4,000 complaints of the repairs that they are unaware of that. So the building is in very poor shape, even though that was built in the 1950s. And what is the most crucial part is, do you know these lots are located in a flooding area? That means you cannot put anything as per code, the Appendix G, you cannot put one unit in the top. Indeed, NYCHA, what they did in order to resolve the problem is they relocate the boiler rooms and they put in the open spaces, these ugly boxes that they put it, and the foundation went always down to sit on the bedrock because when flooding, it caused serious structural damage to a building. In reality, it may be in conflict with the electrical system that provide underground, or maybe with the sewer system. So basically this building, or without even counting the soil, it can have erosions, and then maybe the building can tilt or we can sink. So this kind of situation is almost impossible, and it has to reorganize this development in order to produce affordable housing. The comment that you can make and say is it will cost a lot of money. Yes, indeed, it is. But the Hell's Kitchen, they doing something like that. So they try to reorganize, and the developer put $625 per square feet in construction. I think there's a situation where your perception, I think, is wrong about the Upper East Side. I'm just trying to make my points on the Upper East Side, even though I have a lot of experience outside. But my goal in this meeting as a representative of the community board members is I had to target our community. And what you are planning to say, it probably is true in other communities, but not in our community. Indeed, for instance, in the new developments in the unprotected avenues, the developer, they demolish, and you have my study, they demolish for one affordable unit, they demolish 9. The developers, they always build from the maximum, they build the lowest density. A good example is, a developer came to the community board to relocate the bus station on Madison and 79th Street. And the developer, I did the calculations, and they supposed to build 102 dwelling units, and they built 16. So that is the problem in the lack of control of heights and the lack of control of density, and the lack of control of the housing demolition. So this is the problem that face our community. And I found that something reasonable in our community, that R108 works perfectly, because in 230 feet, the developer will build the affordable housing. The developer is making money, and the developer use quality of housing. So I think we have a solution that we can move forward. And we would like to see that you consider in this development, in this project, this development that actually was done by a developer, not by myself, or not from my opinion, it's by a developer. And if you want to review, the project is at York Avenue Avenue and 86th Street. And you have in my study exactly the numbers. Sorry for so many questions at the same time.
No, thanks, Marco. I mean, you're absolutely right. Affordable housing is really expensive to produce, which to me is one of the reasons why affordable housing alone can't get us out of the housing shortage and the housing crisis. You know, many folks have recommended, why can't we just do affordable housing? You're correct. I mean, it's so expensive that we need all hands on deck. We need affordable housing. We need privately financed housing. We need all types of housing, and we need to make the zoning changes to enable that and to enable our affordable housing dollars to go farther. I mean, so much zoning today creates obstacles in terms of time, in terms of money, that render a given amount of money. It produces less affordable housing than it could if the zoning worked in harmony with, yes, it completely acknowledge the limited sources of funding out there for affordable housing. You know, I think that these changes are pretty significant. If we are able to increase housing production by 33% per year, that is pretty significant. And so most communities are telling us, oh, this is too big, this is too big, this is too big. It's kind of refreshing to be here where a couple folks have already said that it's not big enough. It is the biggest thing that we've ever attempted in city planning history and city history. It's the first time that we've taken a completely as broad as possible geographic approach from the lowest density areas to the highest density areas. If we are able to accomplish something here and the sky doesn't fall, then I am hopeful that this sets the table for future significant actions to address the range of problems that you discuss.
Thank you very much. We have two members of the public. Lo Vandervalk, please unmute.
Yes, my name is Lo Vandervalk. I'm representing Carnegie Hill Neighbors. There's a lot of material here, obviously, and I don't claim to have been able to go through all of it, but I am concerned, and we are concerned about the R8B areas. Those are our valued mid-blocks. We have a lot of very tall buildings being built on the avenues now, and that is the way development has been encouraged since the beginning of zoning. And we have respected the mid-blocks because the mid-blocks allow for a lot of light and air and some greenery that all people surrounding the mid-blocks can enjoy. And we noticed that in this proposal that there is now an ability to increase the height, the allowable height of mid-blocks from 85 feet with a bonus of 20% to 105 feet. And we are sorry to see this. We think the mid-blocks should be kept sacrosanct. And there's a point, if you increase, there comes a point where you really do diminish light and air, not just in the donut, but on the streets as well. So we would like to put in a very substantial hard plug, and we are going to communicate to Keith Powers, as we already have, that we would like this to be respected. And there have been earlier attempts to take away, to increase the heights, the mid-blocks, and they have even before de Blasio, they have been shot down, thankfully. But I think, and I want to say one more thing, and I'm sorry to take up so much of your time, but
not at all.
But the most recent invasion of the mid-blocks was for the 94th Street project between 2nd and 3rd Avenues, where the developer, because of the push for affordable housing, was allowed to go to over 400 feet in height, and this included the mid-block. In fact, all of the development was the mid-block. There was no development on the avenues, and this is horrible. And I mean, this is a key case where the community board supported it. There was a lot of push let's help affordable housing. And it was all affordable, and there could be no reasonable discussion anymore. And we really lament this. We're going to bring up this as an example again and again because we think this is a great abuse of the great zoning that New York does have to make the city at least livable. And it deals with light and air, and those are respected quantities. So that's the end of my recitation, and I thank you for this opportunity.
No, thank you, Lo. I appreciate that and have entirely expected to be having this conversation. You're correct about the RAP in particular. I'll say here's how we arrived at where we are in the proposal. So universal affordability preference, far and away the biggest proposal of the entire package, the housing opportunity package. Basically what we're doing is extending an inclusionary framework to all medium and high density districts. Today, an inclusionary framework applies in about 13% of medium and high density districts. We're applying that throughout 100%. That means in order to max out your site, in order to use all the development rights generated on a site, from here on out, if this is enacted, you will be required to produce permanently affordable housing. Our starting point from this was during our fair housing reporting, where we live, New York City, back in 2020. This is the HUD mandated, like, what are you doing, New York City, in order to affirmatively further fair housing? And we noticed that most medium and high density districts have a preference for senior affordable housing. That is, senior affordable housing can be a little bit bigger than other types of housing. We asked ourselves, what if we just extended that preference to all forms of affordable and supportive housing? That could be really powerful. Well, we did that, we mapped it, and we noticed something. Some districts do not have an existing preference for senior affordable housing. Probably the most prominent is R8B. And if you look on the map where R8B is mapped, it's a lot on the Upper East Side, it's a lot on the Upper West Side. You see, some, East Village, not too far from me, some in Brooklyn. But if we left R8B out of what is, the biggest fair housing proposal in New York City history, the biggest proposal for affordable housing in New York City history, then we would be leaving out huge swaths of Upper East Side, Upper West Side, Park Slope and Brooklyn, things like districts like that, the preservation districts. And, I have to say, if we, went back to the feds, the federal government, and said, hey, here's our big fair housing proposal, we're leaving out like the really wealthy parts of town that don't produce any housing today and that are shrinking, in fact, that are losing housing units. Honestly, I think that we have a potential lawsuit on our hands, And so in order to extend this fair housing proposal, proposal to create an inclusionary framework across all medium and high density districts uniformly and universally, it's called universal affordability preference, we had to create a new 20% bump for R8B. Of course, if you want sites to produce that affordable housing, you have to give them the envelope to do it, hence the additional height. We absolutely recognize that there would be concerns around this. We absolutely recognize that there will be a big discussion on this. We don't have unilateral control what happens here. We're in the middle of public review where, we're at community boards, we're going to go to city planning commission, we're going to go to council. Maybe there will be modifications to that, but it will be up to the city council to balance those fair housing concerns against, concerns about heights and the mid blocks that you mentioned. And so we're happy to have that conversation.
And
Thank you very much.
Elizabeth, can
We
you
have
allow
another
me?
member of the public, Michael Plottle. Again, we look forward to hearing from you.
Very much. I just want to say that in principle, in theory, yes, inclusive housing, affordable housing, spreading the mandate. In practice, when you look at what actually happens in this neighborhood, it's not the case. You have tons of people who are aging in place. You have naturally occurring retirement communities. I have parents, in-laws, friends. I know a whole slew of 80 and 90-year-olds who are still in their apartments and who will be terribly impacted by this increase in height and density. We are losing units because there are no height restrictions on the C19, on the avenues. And so a clever architect working with a clever developer, and I've done these calculations, will figure out a way just to get the height, just to be able to sell more units. So something's got to be looked at. I think that just a broad brush, saying we're going to grant you an extra 20%, it's going to be subject to the law of unintended consequences. And there's got to be a more thoughtful approach, taking into account what's going on and doing something about people tearing down low-rise 4- and 5-story buildings to put up 300 and 400-foot tall buildings with fewer apartments. The math doesn't make sense, and that's why there's a loss, and that's a big contributor. Don't even start on the apartments that are occupied only part-time and that are only held for investment purposes. But we're losing a lot of FAR devoted to housing to make giant trophy apartments with these buildings that have no limitations. And that's got to be looked at more than just adding a whole lot of FAR. It's got to be better cooked.
I mean, these proposals I see as a pretty dramatic improvement over the status quo, given the concerns you just mentioned. We think UAP, in conjunction with the state tax benefit, actually do push the market away from condos and towards rentals that will be actually occupied by people and that will actually include affordable housing, permanently affordable housing at AMIs that are actually pretty good. And that the tax benefit also includes replacement ratio, that if there are any dwelling units on those zoning lots, that get redeveloped, you have to replace those with an additional affordable unit beyond what's already required through the zoning or through the tax benefit. And it doesn't address every conceivable issue that you mentioned, but it is significantly better than the status quo, which I agree in the Upper East Side is not great.
And we need more open space. Look, just there's a project on 82nd and 83rd, or 83rd and 84th and 3rd Avenue. It was a mid-rise building. They split it into 2 zoning lots. They tore down one half. They're going to put up a 500-foot tall building. And then the other part is going to be the affordable piece. And now they're 2 separate buildings. So you've got a poor door and a rich door. And I worry that we're going to see more and more and more of that. So, the devil is in the details, but at least put in some type of height cap on the avenues. You have it when you go further west along 5th Avenue into Park Avenue. There's a height limitation. Why not just do it for the whole Upper East Side? At least we'll have something decent and we can work within an envelope and not feel like, you're living on the 20th or the 30th floor and you're staring into the 40th floor of the building right across the street.
I mean, we are proposing to, I'll get to the campus slides eventually, or the slides for zoning lots with existing buildings. We are seeking across a range of sites to enable contextual development as opposed to the non-contextual stuff you see. We're not like outlawing the tower regulations or anything like that, and do have concerns that imposing height limits is not exactly encouraging of the types of housing production that, it would actually serve as a disincentive to housing production, which is not the direction we're trying to go in. But I do hear you.
Contextual would be good. Thank you.
I'm just going to insert myself again, if I could. I just want to say I really, really congratulate all of the people at City Planning for a willingness to take a look at the zoning resolution. I really do. And I only wish you had gone even further in some ways. And so I just wanted to say that. And then I also wanted to comment that one of the things that has bothered us, which is not necessarily a city planning issue, and it's or 2 things. One is not really a city planning issue, and that's displacement. When people are pushed out of their homes because of new construction, even if the new construction is going to be 100% affordable for those people who've been pushed out, whether it's AMI affordable or whatever, they don't have any place to live for 3 years. So they generally end up leaving the neighborhood, leaving the district. And I think that that problem of displacement is really part of what is so upsetting to all of us, or many of us, about the 4- and 5-story building, the tenements disappearing. And then the other thing is that it seems to me as an architect that one of the issues that I wish you would look at, and in the opposite direction you went, is the transfer of development rights. I understand the utility of that for landmarks, but zoning lot mergers. And it seems to me that zoning lot mergers have been one of the sort of principal causes of our kind of super tall misery, even though they're not technically super talls. And I think that in a way, for me, one way to approach it might be to say, to modify and in fact make more restrictive zoning lot mergers, and then or to introduce some kind of real height limits throughout the city. Unlikely, but anyway, that was a
No, those are great points, Anthony. I appreciate that. I mean, displacement is among our core concerns here with housing opportunity. We hate to see it in all its forms, whether indirect or direct. In terms of direct displacement, as you know, if I call every year, I call over to HCR, Sheldon Melnitsky over there, and I just confirm every year what their laws and policies are around involuntary displacement of rent stabilized units. And every year it's been the same. The HCR does not allow involuntary displacement from rent stabilized units. That's what leads to the sometimes like extremely significant, even 7-figure buyouts you see for rent stabilized tenants in buildings with rent stabilized units that are redeveloping. Also, good cause. We will see how that plays out. I know that people are trying to figure out exactly what additional protections those will provide for non-rent stabilized units. But in terms of regulating the direct displacement through redevelopment, those are a state law issue. We have rent stabilization, which is about as ironclad as it gets. And then, we have significant new laws passed on that front just last year, which should also help to address that issue. So we hear you. Just in terms of indirect displacement caused through rising housing costs, through competition for a limited number of existing units, that type of displacement is created always and everywhere through the lack of housing. And so that is a main target of these proposals. We want to alleviate displacement pressure created by the housing shortage in neighborhoods all across the city. Obviously, it happens in Community District 8. We see it in extremely pronounced ways a little bit to the north of you, as people who, for instance, who can't find suitable housing on the Upper East Side at a price they can afford going north. That puts pressure on Harlem, puts pressure on, Washington Heights, puts pressure on Inwood. And so by enabling a little more housing in all neighborhoods, including core neighborhoods, we hope to address some of those displacement pressures as well. I hear you on the zoning lot mergers. Yes, zoning lot mergers have been the engine of some of the super tall development. On the other hand, they've also enabled preservation of some low-rise developments that in the absence of zoning lot mergers would presumably be demolished and redeveloped. So I'm not saying that I love zoning lot mergers. I'm not saying that I hate them, but it's one of these issues that you have to balance. If we outlaw zoning lot mergers, then I 100% expect that a lot of those 5-6-story townhouse, multifamily buildings that we've talked about in Community District 8, a lot more of those would end up being demolished in the absence of it. So it gives you a sense of the issues that we have to weigh when we consider zoning changes like this, but I appreciate those comments.
Thank you. Marco, you have another comment.
Elizabeth, I think before Lo wasn't able to respond to the answer he got. So I think we should go to Lo first. And then after Lo, Valerie wants to comment also. Is that okay?
Okay. Lo Vanderbilt again?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Kevin. This is Lo Vanderwalt speaking for Carnegie Hill Neighbors. Yes, I just wanted to come back to the RAB and the mid block, the rear yards, and we also noticed, I didn't bring this up, but elsewhere in this proposal, there is the effort to shorten the rear yard from 30 feet to 20 feet. That would, of course, require state changes in the state law, but still, even the attempt to do that is again diminishing the rear yard and the light and air that comes with it. And but I want to come back more specifically to the point raised by John in answering my first objection on keeping on not increasing the height of the RAP districts, and that is that if the federal people argue that you're leaving certain zoning districts unchanged, a retort to that is if you look at an entire block from avenue to avenue, from street to street, if that was considered, so that if the increases come at the ends of that block, and they can be partially credited to the mid block in terms of subsidies concerns by the feds, because a block is a block, and these are not districts that are far away from each other. These are integral districts, and this was integral to the early planning of how do you arrange heights and in a city to make it livable. So I offer that as a retort. Thank you.
Thank you, Lo.
Thank
I
you,
also
Lo.
actually have a slide or two on the changes to the rear yard and light and air provisions that when I share my screen, I can go through those quickly as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Marco? Sorry, you have your hand up.
Elizabeth, so Valerie can't raise her hand, but she wants to ask a question.
Okay, Sharon
Go ahead,
Falk
Valerie.
Marshall? Marco, do you want to speak?
No, Elizabeth, Valerie has been waiting a long
Well,
time. She can't raise her hand, so if Valerie can do
please,
that.
where's Valerie?
Oh, okay, I'll wait. I know Sharon hasn't spoken at all, so I'll wait for Sharon to go and then I'll wait.
Okay, Sharon?
Thank you, Valerie. And also, I'd like to begin by really echoing Anthony's comments regarding how open and available city planning employees have been regarding all of the City of Yes proposals. And Ashka, is that how you pronounce your name, Ashka?
Aska.
Aska, yes, thank you. And also, thank you very much, John, for being here as well. Thank you, Ashka. I wanted to circle back to Lo's comments regarding RAB. And more specifically, the response being that if a plan is submitted to the federal government and some areas of Manhattan are exempt because of RAB, that could result in a lawsuit. And my response to that would be, bring it on. More specifically, large swaths of the city were downzoned. Large swaths were downzoned. I'm thinking of Staten Island, for example. And what happened as a result is that areas of Manhattan, in particular the Upper East Side, has really borne the burden, if you will, of having large areas that are highly, highly dense. I'm not really a big fan of spreading the pain of increasing density across the city equitably, because we have very much shouldered increased density in the first place for many, many years. I would suggest, John, not to be too concerned about a lawsuit from the federal government, because if they did not sue the city when other areas were downzoned, I'm not sure that they will take a look at an RAB area and say, look, we're going to sue over this. And because we have shouldered the burden, the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side, Midtown South, and other areas of the city have had to shoulder the burden of increased density. We are scrambling, and I would say begging that you leave RAB alone. And that's our only refuge.
No, thank you. Thank you for those comments. Very well articulated.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were done.
I do apologize. Just one moment.
Sure.
That's our only refuge, is the RAB, and in general, the mid blocks. By the way, Community Board A attempted to get city planning to view favorably our proposal to downzone the avenues, and that's something that Michael Platel had mentioned, that the avenues were not protected. So you don't have the avenues being protected, then we can only feel some neighborliness in the mid-block. And I would suggest strongly, and I do agree with Lo, and I do also think that his example for 94th Street was a good example. Leave RAB alone. And lastly, on a different topic, I know you have some slides regarding campus infill. However, it still impacts light and air. It still shortens the distance between buildings. And I appreciate you, John, being here this evening, and I appreciate ASCA as well. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Those are very well articulated concerns, and you really have put your finger on why we are advancing a set of proposals that address those issues in low density districts as well. We are fully grappling right now with the fact that just as recently as 2 administrations ago, we were downzoning huge swaths of low density New York that not long ago produced a fair bit of housing. And we have shifted housing production so much towards the medium and high density parts of the city over the last 15 or 20 years that it really is unconscionable. And I assure you that we are addressing that through these proposals, through things like town center zoning and low density commercial districts, transit oriented development on large sites, ADUs, adjustments to the zoning districts in low density areas that kind of fix them again. We broke those districts by layering on so many restrictions. And we think this is a balanced plan that asks as much of low density areas as we're asking of medium and high density districts. There's actually a map in the analytical framework of the environmental review that shows projected numbers of housing units created by neighborhood tabulation area. That's a smaller geography than community board. And we are proud of how evenly distributed that is. When I talked about the fair housing concern and the RAB, excuse me.
I'm just gonna let those other districts duke it out, but I wanna emphasize RAB. I want to echo Lo's comments regarding RAB.
Okay, and
Also
I do want to respond to that as well and say that when I rose the fair housing concerns there, it was in that context. We are literally proposing adjustments to zoning in every district, in every type of neighborhood across the city. If we were to do that and say, accept R8B, that's sacrosanct. I'm a lawyer. My background is in fair housing, and I would be able to write that complaint because, for whatever reason, this emerged from land use political processes years past. R8B tends to be mapped in, very wealthy, largely white parts of the city.
Yes,
and so if we were to say every,
I do apologize. I do apologize because I hear you, John, and we're not going to agree, but we had to fight for that because of the increased density in the first place. So that's because other areas of the city was being downzoned. So I hear you. So my recommendation is allow the federal government to sue. We'll be
I was thinking of a
behind you.
private lawsuit, actually.
Yeah,
we
we'll
do
be
get
behind
sued
you.
by those
We'll
things.
be behind you in city planning.
And I want to say that I personally do not want to do things that are inconsistent with fair housing policy, regardless of whether or not we'll get sued, regardless of whether or not we'll win. The point here is, as part of the city's citywide fair housing comprehensive plan, we absolutely had to take a look at what even the preservation districts could do. We recognize that this is part of a conversation that will happen over the course of public review. I would not be surprised if there are certain modifications to that by the end of the process, but we couldn't leave it sacrosanct from the get-go for the reasons I've articulated, but I appreciate your viewpoint.
I also just want to make a couple of clarifications. And I think also the East 94th Street project that was mentioned a couple of times. That project was a rezoning that happened at city planning, and that was, just want to clarify for those not familiar with it, that was not rezoning an R8B district. That was rezoning a manufacturing district to a C28 district. And while it is in the mid-block, as mentioned, it is also in the context of mostly C46 and C28 districts around it. So that area has its own context, it has its own land use rationale. And I totally appreciate the comments about R8B and the mid-blocks, just wanted to clarify that. And also wanted to kind of put another fact on layer on another thing about sort of how we are encouraging affordable housing, or specifically income restricted housing. So we have sort of two ways to do that. One is MIH, which is when we require, that you have income restricted housing, and that is only what we can only map that when we are significantly increasing the zoning density or zoning potential for an area. So if in this case, that is not what's happening. So you have that option where if we were to rezone R8B to something else and significantly increase that residential capacity, that's one way to, require affordable housing. What we're doing here is R8B is staying as is, but in the cases of certain projects, when they want to provide affordable housing through the UAP program, they're allowed that extra, height to be able to put that 20% bump. So just want to be clear that, it's not a change to R8B wholesale. It's more of a change that's coming as part of the UAP program to enable, affordable housing, especially in Community District 8, where there isn't much potential for MIH. Most of the area is already built out, but this is one way where we can encourage that, the Community District 8 doesn't lose out on the potential for more income restricted housing. So I just wanted to, make those points.
Thanks, Oscar.
Okay.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you, Sharon. Appreciate
So
it.
I think it's my turn now. So I just want to make a couple of points, and John, I appreciate you answering some of the questions at the beginning. But I want to sort of build on what Sharon and Lo are saying. Well, first of all, I want to go to that 94th Street project and just say that one of the reasons that this community board supported what we would, I think, a majority of us would say was an out of context development was because we are desperate to get affordable housing units on the Upper East Side. And I take issue with the fact that there seems to be some underlying sort of vibe here that we don't want affordable housing. I mean, we are the most densely populated district. And what we have been saying is give us a height limit. Give us a height limit, and then we can help you bonus it up with affordable housing. And you guys have rejected us at every turn. But I don't understand that when now you're going to say, okay, we'll give you, you will let you have a 20% bonus if you put in, affordable housing. So I for this district, and people have been talking about this different districts and how proposals 1 through 4 really don't affect Manhattan, and it's really to create the medium to high density housing in the other boroughs. And you're asking us to layer on or to vote on those items that really don't affect us and look at this in a citywide perspective. But why isn't anybody looking at our district and worrying about how densely populated we are and trying to help us with a solution that will give us more affordable housing without having to sacrifice all the light and air that is in all these less dense neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Queens? Like, I don't understand what's happening here. And I have to say that earlier in the week and last week, John was actually persuading me to a different point. But now that I'm hearing you answer these other questions, I'm really saying you guys are losing a real opportunity to help us create affordable housing on the Upper East Side without putting a height limit on our avenues and helping us argue for more bonuses for greater height on, east of Lexington to get more affordable housing up here. And I think you're losing an opportune moment to help us do that, because in the last 10 years, all we've seen is the destruction of affordable housing in this neighborhood. And as Mr. Platel said, there's not a dearth of construction of residential units on the Upper East Side. We've got battling condos going up on 83rd and 2nd. Around the corner, we've got another construction project. And what I was going to ask you, John, is do you have any figures on how many units of housing are actually being built in Community District 8 as opposed to all these other places? Because we've got residential everywhere going up. But none of it is affordable. None of it.
Thanks, Valerie. I completely hear you. The status quo on the Upper East Side, I recognize why people are discontent with it. You have parts of the community district that are actually shrinking in terms of overall number of housing units, which is obviously a problem. My division does keep housing data, things like pipeline. If you go to our where is new housing being added or housing production snapshot 2023, you can see how your community district compares to others around the city on that. I completely recognize that many, maybe even most neighborhoods in the city want to implement development restrictions to address certain issues that they see with development that they don't like. It's just a really, really tall order at a time when
no pun intended, right? No.
Sorry about that. I'm truly sorry. It's really tough at a time when we are facing, the tightest housing market since at least the 60s, to be entertaining things that, development restrictions that conceivably make housing development harder.
But what you're calling a restriction, I'm calling a bonus opportunity. And I don't understand why city planning is so close to that? We've been trying to get the answer to that since I joined the board in 2017 and even before that.
I mean, the answer is straightforward because it's a restriction that would make it harder to produce housing. And so you're taking something away in the attempt to claw something back. These proposals, housing opportunity proposals, you'll see all of them are basically additive. We are not taking anything away from people, but we are layering on top opportunities for affordable housing. We are pushing the market in places like the Upper East Side towards rental away from condo. We're requiring permanently affordable housing if you want to, use all the development rights that are generated by your site. Works in conjunction with the state tax benefit. Again, I recognize that the status quo presents problems, and we think that we are significantly addressing those problems through these proposals. We really do.
Well, I mean, everybody has a FAR limit, and I'm not going to go on here very much longer, but there's a FAR limit. Before, the FAR limit was Community District 8's only protection because we didn't have any height limits. I mean, people only think of us as being, Fifth Park and Lexington. We've got the far East Side, what we call, maybe ironically, the wild, wild west when it comes to construction. And everybody shows, oh, you can't have a height limit because you have one building like this and one building like that. And we've come up with 10 different ways, Sharon at Civitas and all the other groups here, to try to say, we know we have a desirable neighborhood. We know that developers want to build here, but why not I'm baffled by the city's reluctance to use their leverage to get more than just the crumbs of affordable housing off the table, and seemingly giving developers, basically, even if you gave them the 20% FAR bonus, with the affordable housing, if they didn't have whatever we're calling it in state government, the 485X, the tax abatement, it would result in the creation of nothing. Because all of these projects, the project on 94th Street was a standstill until it looked like something was going to happen up in Albany, that they would get the tax break. So, I mean, I just, in trying to, this board tomorrow night, at least if it goes along with the straw poll vote, is not going to vote for the UAP. Because if we were just looking at it in our neighborhood, it's not really going to vote, and the feedback that I'm getting is, it's really not going to get us what we want, which is more affordable housing. It will only be greater density here, and it just won't help the situation. And unfortunately tonight, I don't think that you and Aska, as much as you were working so hard, and believe me, I'm out there saying how great a job you guys are doing, I don't see you persuading us that is really going to happen. It's just going to mean that there's going to be more affordable housing in other districts, and we're going to see more super talls, more lot mergers, more higher buildings requests, and we're going to be, again, blackmailed, if you will, into giving up lots on the side streets to get the crumbs of affordable housing. And still, every day, and looking at the remaining lots of walk-ups that we have and how endangered they are. And I'm going to stop now, but I really think it's very short-sighted of city planning not to work with us to create a program for the most densely populated districts in the city, to come up with a bonus program that will work in those districts. And I think it's doable, but you guys don't seem to want to work with
Can I respond?
Yes.
So the way that UAP works, it caps market rate housing FAR where it is today. Literally the only way it could lead to more density in your neighborhood is if it's 100% permanently affordable housing and an average of 60% AMI. Literally the only way that it could lead to additional density is through the addition of affordable housing. As far as why we are not entertaining some of the development restrictions that the community board has recommended for this community district, I know that it is your job, this community board's job, to consider the community district, this community district. And, you've said explicitly that you don't want to consider things that happen in other community districts.
No, that we're on the fence about. I mean, just like everybody,
Okay. I hope you can support that, because I want to tell you, things that happen in other parts of the city affect Upper East Side too. They affect you in ways positive and negative. We're all residents of New York City, and it's totally legitimate for you to have opinions on aspects of zoning proposals that do not affect your community district directly. That's an aside. But if we, were to say, like, let's, entertain some development restrictions on the Upper East Side, you're not the only community district who's looking for development restrictions. In fact, I would say in one form or another, most of them are. If we are, working with you to impose a set of, height limits or other restrictions in your community district, you are the wealthiest community district in the city. And so if we're doing that for you, then personally, I think it's game over, and we can't not do that for other community districts as well. It looks really bad.
Now, John, you've walked right into it, because this is the point. The point is we want community input on things that happen in our community.
Of course.
And what this does is make a lot of things as of right, and is seen by maybe not this community board right now. I'm not speaking as the chair of this community board, but I am hearing from people in other boroughs. This is seen as not a ULURP, but a usurp of community review powers. Okay. And so you're telling us that for the greater good, we need to do this, but we're all sitting here with the limited, and please, there are very few communities in the city that have 4 avenues with the most valuable, arguably some of the most valuable property in the city of New York, that literally have no height limits. Okay. And there are cities all over this country where every street has a height limit. Okay. So the fact that we don't have one on the avenues that we're talking about is highly unusual in urban areas. Will you give me that?
I'm not sure. I feel your anger about this. I'm trying to explain.
Not angry. I'm not angry. I'm a little bit passionate about this now, because I wasn't even going to go in this direction. But I mean, this is what we're hearing. We have lost so much, and this is also part of the tug here. The limited advisory capacity that we have in guiding the direction of our community, whether it's residential, commercial, the impacts of COYO, etc. All of those proposals impacted every community differently, and you could see that when I go to the borough board and hear my friends in Queens talking about what the difference between a corner store, all that stuff. But this is really giving as of right in a lot of these areas where the community board at least had some input. And it's a very scary proposition, given the fact that even on some of the issues where we're supposed to have an advisory input, people are just literally ignoring us. So, I mean, I hope you understand that you're asking us in a very short period of time to agree to make a whole lot of things as of right over, after like 60, the last time the zoning code was changed was in 1960. So I think, this is a lot to digest. You guys have done a really A+ job in trying to move us through it. But I don't really think that you're really recognizing or giving no, you recognize it, but you're really not giving any points or credence to what we're saying about what is happening in our neighborhood. And I think it just sounds like the undercurrent, and I'm pretty sure you don't mean it, is that you think we're trying to use restrictions to keep people out. And I'm saying the exact opposite. Because of the unbelievable power of developers in this city, the communities have to have some tools to get the things that we need. Whether it's a bonus for infrastructure, for, another entrance to the subway, or it's a park because we have, our community, especially, even though we're quote unquote one of the wealthiest communities, has the least amount of park space, in most of the boroughs. We would love to be able to use the fact that people want to be in our neighborhood to get some of the things that we need. And we don't see any like ebb and flow. We see, 470 feet to get 100 studios. I mean, at 80% AMI, I mean, does that really make a lot of sense?
Thank you, Valerie. I mean,
Okay, well, is that
obviously,
yes or no? I guess,
even
okay,
if I can, if I can respond to
okay.
that. It's a citywide proposal, and that's why the changes for any one site are very incremental in nature. We are not taking away community board roles for rezoning. We're not changing any uses from one thing to another. We're not changing any zoning designations from one thing to another. We're just enabling a little more on a range of sites across the city. So if there are any specific instances where you feel like authority is being taken away from the community board, we are very happy to talk to you specifically about
Okay,
those
what about
instances.
what
In
about the
general,
creation of the 15 FAR districts? Where's the community input there?
they're not being mapped anywhere. They require a ULURP in order to be mapped anywhere. And so it goes through ULURP. It'll be, the ULURP that you know and love. So it does not take anything away from the community boards at all. If there are
Thank
any,
you. All right.
yeah, if there are any specific instances where you feel like your authority is being usurped, let us know and we'll talk about that specific instance. But in general, I would say these are incremental changes that do not obviate the need for rezonings. You would not be able to do the 94th Street project under, housing opportunity. That requires a rezoning, as any significant change to the zoning regulations on a parcel will require today or, into the future. As far as UAP goes, it really is the biggest proposal for, I sound like a broken record, the biggest proposal for affordable housing that we have ever forwarded. And it will create tens of thousands of units of income restricted housing at AMIs that are pretty darn good. And it'll allow income averaging. I really, really hope you can support that. It will create incremental affordable units in your community district, and it will create them in other community districts as well. It's so much better than the status quo. It takes a tried and true framework that only applies in 13% of the city and expands it to 100%. If you care about affordable housing like I do, it is the biggest leap forward that we've ever proposed. And I really hope this community district can support it.
Thank you. I think obviously we all want affordable housing. We want it without creating damage to our community. And I think as Valerie has pointed out and is true, we're the most densely populated district in the most densely populated city in the United States. So we're working from that position. We're also, I think what our objective is to get the affordable housing without the unintended consequences, which is what we are finding here. And it isn't easy, and each neighborhood is a bit different. But I think it's worth the effort and time to get it right. And I think there are studies from all over the place that there is a great deal of information that people have tried and failed. And I think that to make one of the things that always amuses me is that there are a lot of affordable housing remaining, thank heaven, rent stabilized, rent controlled apartments, that kind of thing that people can afford. And a lot of people who have them have come up to me in the street and say they're moving away because they can't afford to eat here. They can't afford services here. And one woman who did it said, I had a skirt that I paid $15 to have cleaned here, $5 up a couple of miles north. So and some of it has no affordable retail and service stores anywhere in the low 60s between Fifth and Park, and quite literally the people there, obviously it's a fairly affluent neighborhood, they have to do their food shopping by sending the cook out with a chauffeur. And so that's not a great place to put affordable housing, because they're not going to be able to send the cook out with a chauffeur. So I think that we must consider the consequences. We must study this further and find ways to do what you want and we want, without damaging a community or any community. It's going to take some time, but I think that's where we stand. We have two polls up. We have Marco and Lowe. Are your
Thank you.
polls? Marco
Thank you,
has
Elizabeth.
been muted. Good.
Okay, thank you,
Unmuted.
Elizabeth. Yes. Mr. John, you hear that several fellow community members said the densest community, and Elizabeth just said the density in the country. No, they are wrong. They are, if not, is one of the densest in the world. I have a study made by the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation for the community board number 3, and they find out the community board number 3 is the most densest within the city of Jakarta, community board 2, Mumbai, Paris, Seoul, Bangkok, Mexico City, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro. So guess what? Community board 8 has 111,123 people per square mile. So don't worry about non-suits, because we have been the only community in the entire probably city and in the nation, we have been allowed to grow and to accept different kinds of incomes. Obviously, we have one of the richest income, and we understand that part. But this is a historical part. This is not that was created recently. What is recently is created is the Billionaire Road, which is in another community board district. So this is their issue. So let me move forward, Mr. John, to tell you, I did a calculations like you usually do. I calculate a lot as of right of 25 by 100 is 2,500 square feet. The floor area ratio is 4. The total floor area is 10,000 square feet. The housing factor is 680. Total 15 dwelling units. That is as of right. Now, with your program, with UAP, you increase 0.8. So the floor area will be 4.8. So it will be now the floor area 12,000, and they give you 18 dwelling units. I took a random in the section of RAB. I took a random to that, and I found it that the number of dwelling units in that area is 20 dwelling units. So right now we are doing even better. What are you proposing to do that? In your proposal is coming, they saying 11 affordable units. Remember, it is already is 80, and the example that I have is 72. So we already have affordable unit, and you want to reduce. You don't want to increase. You want to reduce. And then you said 56 market rate in the Upper East Side. in the way that usually develop the Upper East Side, especially in the avenues, they usually the density that they use is between 23% to 55%. So that means if we use these numbers, you are reducing affordable housing. You are reducing the number of housing in our community. Even though myself, I would like to reduce that, but not. We would like at least to maintain. That is the argument for RAB. Now, let me move to the avenues. And the avenues, let me give you an example and then you understand what is our concern. Because you don't you have the maximum maximum density, but you don't have the low density. A developer, Excel, 79 and 79 on First Avenue, he demolished 79 affordable units. Guess what? How many dwelling units he built? 0. Because he put a community facility. A community facility is a medical facility. Like we don't have, we are starving for medical facility. No. I'm talking ironically right now. We have a corridor of hospitals lower the 72nd Street. And every time they are coming and they're getting more floor area and high buildings. Recently, MSK, 600-foot tower, and they ask even more. Not only that, it's all over our place, plenty of community facilities, medical facilities, like we are a medical facility district. But in addition to that, they have free air rights on the FDR. So my point is, you don't control the growth of some community facilities. We have and we accept the corridor of hospital. That is fine. But outside they are coming to build more, to make even more money. They are already making a lot of money. And the lawsuit will be in that direction rather in the direction that we don't accept affordable units. We have plenty. My perception is if you control the low density, rather you are silenced in the low density, but you are clearly established the high density, but not the low density. And that is Excel take advantage. Excel is very smart, and he used everything that he knows because has plenty of consultants, good consultants, and he take everything in our community. When somebody else asks to Excel, what are you gonna do for our community? He said, well, we're gonna give you an ice cream. Come on, if the city planning do not enforce some rules that allows the developer make profits, yes, we have to allow, but no give it everything of the pipe. I consider it like a pipe, the profits. If they take 3/4 of the pipe, fine, but 1/4 invest in our community. Those developments that you mentioned that have tower buildings, transfer the air rights. Guess what? In those developments that transfer the air rights, what you are promoting is substandard of housing, because those people, they make millions of dollars and they don't want to improve their own buildings because they don't profit right away. However,
and Marco, I think we're straying somewhat from where we want to be, and we have not only do we have Lo who wants to ask yet another question, but we also have John McClelland who hasn't spoken at all, and we should, I think, let John ask whatever questions he has, and then I would really like to see the slides that John brought with him.
Let me finish my statement. So the point is, if you go in the direction just only to control the low density and control the height with R10A, it will be a solution. And usually in R10A, what it does, most of the developers, they don't build the affordable housing within the development. They build usually in RAB. That is fine. And that is acceptable as long as it's within our community board. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. John McClelland, you haven't spoken?
Thank you. I've been listening to this, feeling fascinated for the entire evening. I've lived on 85th Street between First and York for nearly 40 years. My building faces north. I'm on the 10th floor. So I've watched a parade of buildings go up First Avenue. First 87th, then 88th, then 89th, I think 90th as well. Now across the street from me on First Avenue, we have Mr. Excel owns the property between 85th and 86th, and he's torn down most of that and kind of left it a mess as to what he's going to do next. He also owns the corner of 86th and First on the north side of 86. He's bought that whole chain of buildings and imminently is going to tear them down. We walk over to Third Avenue and Papaya King, that whole series of buildings, low-rise buildings, is coming down. And you seem to say that we're somehow selfish for not wanting to see more tall buildings built. But one quick anecdote. I attended a meeting that I can't remember the man from Extel's name about 3 or 4 years ago, and he deigned to speak to the public and take questions. And at one point, one man in the audience said to him, "I'd really like to be able to see the sky." And his response was, "Then move to the suburbs." So this is the kind of attitude that's making me extremely angry, and I've said enough.
Thank
No,
you, John.
I recognize that it is very, very, very tough job that Ozka and I have to come ask people who have lived in an area, a neighborhood for a long time and who love their neighborhood to accept a certain amount of changes. But I do want to emphasize again that the nature of this proposal, the thing that makes it powerful is strictly geographic breadth. The fact that we're doing things in every neighborhood across the city. If we take that approach, then these housing opportunity proposals, the changes that they mean for any one area are relatively minor. If you look at our environmental review, the additional density that these proposals would create is 0.7 units per acre over 15 years. So it's less than 1 unit per acre over 15 years. These proposals derive the entirety of their power from their geographic breadth. There's a map in the analytical framework that shows how many units total we expect in different NTAs, neighborhood tabulation areas that are smaller geographies than community boards. If we work on this together, we can get a lot done. We can create over 100,000 units, I think, without heightening the concerns that we've heard tonight about changes that you've seen in your neighborhood under the status quo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lo, do you have a question or?
Yes. Again, Lo Vandervalk speaking on behalf of Carnegie Neighbors. I don't have a new question. I have a follow-up to Aska's comments about my earlier question. And being a non-community board 8 member, I don't have the right to automatic rebuttal. So I'm using this as an opportunity. I want to thank Aska and John also for participating in these more detailed discussions. This is greatly appreciated. And I think I look forward to future discussions on the current topics as well. But I wanted to raise the point that Aska challenged me on, which she was correct. The project of 94th Street was not taking away from R8B, but it was taking away from a low-density manufacturing zone. However, that project was actually a two-step project. One was to change the zoning, and 2 was to allow for the large buildup. And so coming back to the changing in zoning, the most logical change from a low-density manufacturing zoning would have been R8B. And the reason I say that is if you divide the block in half, the north half and the south half, the north half was R8B. And north of that was also R8B. And so the south, to the south of 94th Street, I think there's about a third of the mid block was also R8B. So the most natural way to increase from manufacturing to residential would have been R8B. And also want to say is that the tall tower that will be built on that southern half of that block, it's casting into deep shadow and darkness the northern half, because that's the way the sun works in Manhattan. And when we talk about light and air, nobody talks about sunlight unless they're talking about shadow studies, and they get so complicated that everybody is lost in the weeds. But the point is that if half of your block, the southern half of your block where the sunlight comes from, is a building that's well over 400 feet, probably 450 feet, maybe even taller, you really are blocked from light and air. So I just wanted to make that as a correction to what the development was on 94th Street. Thank you.
Thanks, so appreciate that. And I think, I want to keep the focus on housing opportunity today, in terms of what we're voting on, but I think that's a good example of what John mentioned, that project went through ULURP. So any projects like those that are really significantly changing or rezoning, they are continuing to go through the ULURP process, the public review process. What we're talking about today in terms of housing opportunity, it really is an incremental change related to, adding a little bit of housing everywhere. It is not making those wholesale changes to any of the districts in terms of R8 or whatever it may be. So I think that's a good also segue. You talked about light and air. Talk about some of the light and air things that, John, you wanted to share as well.
Thanks. It doesn't look like there are any outstanding comments now. I can take just a quick few minutes to reintroduce you to to our proposals for contextual zoning on zoning lots with buildings on them and irregular and obstructed sites, and also some of the light and air stuff too. So can I do that real quick?
Please.
All right, sharing my screen. Sorry that I'm unable to do full screen for whatever reason, but I hope that you can see this, or we'll be able to see on the recording. So what are we doing with our, this is the proposal that's popularly known as campus infill. It's actually broader than that. What we are trying to do is to allow height-limited contextual buildings on, for instance, zoning lots with existing buildings on them, which includes, it could be a NYCHA campus, it could be a church campus. I had a big meeting with faith-based organizations this morning, many of whom face the same types of issues that height factor zoning lots do on like a NYCHA campus, for instance. Other sites that have this issue are irregular lots, like if you're like a big deep lot or like a crazy flag lot or something like that, then you have these issues as well. Obstructed sites, like if elevated infrastructure is running by you, they have those issues too. So here's the deal. If you go back the last 20 years, even in non-contextual districts, that is like R6, R7, R8, without a letter suffix, 99% of the buildings developed in those districts use the contextual rules. That is the modern height-limited zoning that we created in the 1980s. That's great. We love it. It's the type of buildings that communities like better. It's the type of buildings that developers want to build. They're more efficient. You tend to get a higher FAR. But there are these last lingering few types of sites where zoning forces you to do the non-contextual, tall, skinny buildings that makes everybody's head explode. So you see some examples here. You see.
John, we don't see our PowerPoint.
Oh, you don't?
No.
No.
Oh, golly. All right, hold on one second. Let me try that again.
There we go.
Okay, sorry. Thank you very much for letting me know. So you're seeing, you can see that, it's legible. Great. So you're seeing here some examples of those last few remaining sites where, I would argue bad zoning forces you to do buildings that make people's heads explode. Some examples here are 200 Amsterdam, Upper West Side. Over here, I believe that's the building in an R6 district, believe it or not, in Sheepshead Bay, a massive irregularly shaped zoning lot. We have a height factor building in Astoria. These are Claremont Hall in Morningside Heights, is another building that is in an R8 district that has created a lot of consternation among the community there. And when people get mad, they want to get mad at like the Gary Barnetts of the world from Xtel. We've heard about him a lot today. I mean, he's, usually working in tower districts as well, but he does some of this stuff too. And honestly, I think it's the zoning's fault, because we create situations where you're not allowed to do modern height-limited contextual infill if you have a zoning lot that has an existing height factor building that can't comply with the contextual rules. Then you are prohibited in many instances from adding a contextual building on those sites. And so the aim of our campus infill proposals is to say that when development happens on sites that have the development rights, on sites that have the footprint for development, we want it to be modern, contextual, height-limited infill that doesn't make people's heads explode, instead of tall, skinny buildings that end up in court for 5 years or whatever, like we've seen with some of these buildings. And that's the zoning's fault. And so we are adjusting the things like mixing rules. We are adjusting things like how open space works in order to legalize modern height-limited contextual zoning on those sites. And what we're doing, we're eliminating the mixing rules that says if you have a height factor zoning lot or an irregular lot that you can't add a contextual building there. We're harmonizing distance between buildings to state law, 40 feet below a height of 125 and 80 feet above. We're creating flexible height-limited envelopes for larger sites above 20,000 square feet that often have height factor buildings on them today. And then we're imposing new heightened open space standards on large sites as well. So that if you're a NYCHA campus, for instance, you can't use the underlying maximum lot coverage. You have to use 50% max. If you want to take advantage of any of this stuff, your lot coverage is 50% maximum to preserve, large amounts of that open space that characterize those campuses today. And so I know that the memo that you got from George showed, for instance, this scary contextual infill on the Washington Houses campus. What it does not show is, what we would get on that site today under the existing zoning, which is, I have an image here, which is this. This doesn't even max out the development rights that are generated by the site. You could get other tall buildings like this elsewhere on the campus. And a lot of that stuff that's just one story that covers massive amounts of the usable open space in the lot, that counts as open space under the height factor regulations. So it's not like you're preserving, that space for people to, I don't know, have picnics and stuff. The existing zoning doesn't do it. It's really bad. And so zoning mandates stuff like this today on existing height factor zoning lots, on existing irregular lots, and on obstructed sites with elevated infrastructure. So I just want you to know what today's zoning does. And what the thrust of these proposals is to prevent things like this that you're seeing here, which really this is as of right. And so it really did create a lot of concern in the community and push development when it happens, with the development rights that already exist on open space that already exists, that enable it to be height limited contextual infill that has more access to light and air than some of the tall buildings that people resent. And I just want to say, also in the memo, it says that we're eliminating open space requirements. That's not true. We're just saying that you are, instead of having to do complicated open space ratio requirements, where the open space requirement depends on the heights of existing buildings, we just substitute a flat 50% lot coverage maximum that preserves a large, significant portion, about as much open space as the old calculations that required, an astrolabe and a slide rule. Next, quickly, we heard about the reduction in rear yard from 30 to 20. We've also talked in other contexts about reduction of minimum court dimension from 30 feet to 20 feet, reduction of window to lot line requirements from 30 feet to 20 feet, as well as maximum lot coverage of up to 80%. And, we've heard concerns like, oh my gosh, you're loosening light and air standards, you're making things worse. And I would, on the contrary, we are doing this to improve access to light and air. We inadvertently created this situation with 30-foot rear yard, 30-foot lot line to window, 30-foot minimum court dimension, where we've basically forced buildings to be bar buildings. You can see that example here. Those tend to have exposure only on one side, apartments, which means that they're not really appropriate for family-sized units. You don't have windows in your kitchens or your bathrooms. You have, frankly, less access to light and air than housing that was created in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. We are trying to address this inadvertent error in the zoning, 61 zoning and in quality housing, to re-legalize buildings with better access to light and air. You can see the diagram here, how that works. If you reduce rear yard and lot line to window requirements to 20 feet, then you create these units that can actually have multiple exposures, that can have windows in their kitchens and their bathrooms. I'm presenting right now from Hillman Houses, which was basically created as affordable housing for union workers in the 1940s. And my kitchen has a window. My bathroom has a window. Like new construction housing, that's like a rarity. So we are trying to change the regulations in order to improve access to light and air and new construction. So I just want to clear any misconceptions about that and ask if there are any questions or comments about either of these things. I don't know what slide you want me to leave on, whether you want campus or access to light and air, but I'm happy to kind of present this further information on these.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm sure that if people at the meeting weren't starving to death, they would be very interested in asking you questions. And I hope that you will make your presentation available, that we can send it around. I want to thank you and Axel for coming. And Anthony, don't want to cut you off. I want you to say final words.
I think that thank you. It's the presentation is helpful, and I think that it's the fixes that this represents are especially interesting to me, probably not to anybody else here, especially interesting to me because they begin to creep back toward the 1916 zoning. And this is another conversation that maybe you and I can have offline. And so I really appreciate the time you've spent, and I hope it doesn't deter you from coming to visit us again.
Any old business or new business? Do I hear?
Motion to adjourn, and I think Sherry is seconding it.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank
all
you
in
so
favor?
much, guys.
Thank you all. Thank you, our presenters, and thank you for coming, and good night, and have a good dinner.
Take care.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.